Task 1 Overview. Before we look at the rubrics for Task 1, let's look at some of the key terms used throughout the EdTPA handbook. Artifacts. Artifacts are authentic work completed by the teacher and the students. An example of a teacher artifact might be lesson plans created for the lessons. A student artifact would be a work sample, such as a completed quiz or journal writing or an essay. The central focus is a description of the important understandings and core concepts that we want students to develop. It is the overarching goal of the learning segment. A learning segment is a set of 3 to 5 lessons that build upon one another towards the central focus. A learning task is just another word for the lesson. It includes activities, discussions, or other modes of participation that engage the classroom students and help them apply skills and knowledge related to the central focus. The commentary is just the required writing. There is a commentary for each task in EdTPA. Asset refers to specific background info that students bring to the classroom. This could include traditions, culture, language, worldviews, interests, or just everyday experiences. Here are some academic language terms. Academic language is the oral and written language used for academic purposes. This is the language of the discipline. Language demands are specific ways that academic language is used by students. Most EdTPA handbooks include the following language demands. The language function is the focus of the learning segment and is represented by an action verb. For instance, if an elementary teacher wants her students to learn to summarize informational text, the language function might be summarize. The vocabulary is the set of words, phrases, or symbols that students will need to know. Discourse includes how we talk, write, and participate in language construction. Syntax is a set of conventions for organizing symbols, words, and phrases together into structures. For instance, if a teacher is teaching students how to write an essay, syntax might be the rules for grammar. Now, there are 4 handbooks that differ from the others. The mathematics handbook also includes mathematical precision as an additional language demand. The World Language Handbook does not have an academic language requirement. The Early Childhood Handbook requires vocabulary only. The Special Education Handbook focuses on communication skills. Our final term for academic language is language support. Language supports are teaching strategies, scaffolds, and representations. Now let's look at each Task 1 rubric. Rubric 1 is alignment. Rubric 2, student needs. Rubric 3, student assets. Rubric 4, academic language. Rubric 5, assessments. The key concept of Rubric 1 is alignment. Standards, objectives, strategies, and learning tasks are aligned when they consistently address the same or similar learning outcomes for students. Example, if the central focus is that elementary school students learn to summarize informational text, then all standards, objectives, learning tasks, assessments, and teaching strategies must be focused on summarizing informational text. Here's a graphic to make central focus alignment clearer. The key concept of Rubric 2 is supporting varied student learning needs. Candidates are asked in Task 1 to consider all students with special learning needs in their planning. They must consult with their clinical educators about students with special needs and plan accordingly. Student accommodations are listed in a required document called Context for Learning. Here's an example of a context for learning. The left-hand column contains the language needs. The middle column contains the number of children with that particular need. The right column contains the accommodations, modifications, and supports for that student. This is very important. The information in the context for learning must appear in the candidate's EdTPA writing, or they will not score well on this rubric. The key concept of Rubric 3 is using the knowledge of students to inform teaching and learning. The candidate must explain how their lesson plans are explicitly connected to students' prior learning or students' personal, cultural, community assets. We've already covered what assets are. Rubric 4. The key concept is identifying and supporting language demands. The lesson plans must include opportunities for students to use the academic language. Here's an example of each language demand in an elementary ed portfolio. The central focus is retelling a story. The language function could be summarize or retell. Vocabulary could be sequence of events, beginning, middle, end. Discourse examples might be class discussions, journal writing, or summarizing a story verbally with other students or with the teacher. Syntax examples would be first, next, and last for sequencing. Finally, Rubric 5, the key concept is planning assessments to monitor and support student learning. Rubric 5 is all about planned assessments throughout the learning segment. Assessments can be formal or informal. The assessments must provide evidence of students' understanding of knowledge, skills, and concepts related to the central focus. Candidates should include multiple forms of assessment in Task 1. Assessments should occur throughout every lesson. Assessments should accommodate every student. Assessments should include both formal and informal assessments and should be clearly labeled in lesson plans. A typical EdTPA lesson could include a pre-assessment, another informal assessment such as a class discussion to review what was just covered, and some sort of assessment or review at the end of the lesson. Here are some pre-assessment examples. To enter class, each student is given a question about previously discussed content or new content. They must write down the answer or say the answer to the teacher. A discussion. The teacher asks targeted questions and informally records student responses. This activity can give the teacher an idea of what the students know and what they need to know. This can be done either whole group or small group. Also, a short quiz could be given from the day before at the beginning of class. Here are some informal assessment examples. A brief review or discussion anytime during the class period. A game in which the teacher is watching for understanding. Asking questions to check for understanding. Sometimes a teacher doesn't have to really write down anything during an informal assessment, but just look at the show of hands to see which students seem to understand. Here are some formal assessment examples, but there might be others. Written tests, quizzes, reports, journal entries, projects, reflections. This concludes our Task 1 overview.